what has worked for me is, since I don't generally have a good memory naturally, is I do actively need to come up with some mnemonic for tricky words. So it's a combination of two things: mnemonics and flashcards. So a mnemonic is where you create an interesting connection in your mind. So the example I always like to give is when I was learning French, I saw the word for train station was gare, and Gare, and I just imagined Garfield the cat running through a train station, and I came up with a crazy story in my head, and that helped me burn that word into my mind. Because previously, just repeating it, rote memorization, doesn't work as effectively, and having some way of connecting it in your brain can be very effective. But then at the same time, some things you just need the repeated exposure to. Um, and this is where flashcards come in. So, like Shannon and I were saying, we have our sheets where we put our words as they come up. So, like in the middle of a conversation, generally the Skype chats with our teacher, they would write the key words for us to remember. We put that into our sheets, and then using spaced repetition systems in some apps will make it so that you see that word just as you would need to before you forget it. So if it's a very easy word, you'll see it, you'll remember it, you'll say, yeah, yeah, that was easy, and it'll push it forward for a week or two. And then you see it a week or two later, and you're like, it's still easy, I still remember it, pushes it forward even further. But the hard word, you'll keep seeing that every day until it starts to become a little bit easier for you. So it's repetition specifically based on how easy or hard the words themselves are. And that's better than the way I learned in school. We had just a list of words at the back of the each chapter of the book, and I would try to just revise that list of words there and then. The problem was some of those words were easy to remember and some of them were hard, and I would only repeat the frequency based on whenever I remembered to look at that specific page in that book. So a more dynamic approach is a lot better. But I know since you use Memrise, you probably have more things to say on the memory side yourself, Shannon.
Yeah, I use Memrise, which is also an SRS or spaced repetition system. So it's very similar to what you do. The one thing that I make sure to do is use the vocabulary that I'm learning in Memrise in other contexts as well. Because what ends up happening is when you have like a place that you learn and a specific thing that you learn with, or a context that you see it in. For example, if I see the word in Memrise, because like that's the context for me, I'm more likely to get it right and know what it is. But if I were to step outside of that context and try to recall that word, I may struggle a whole lot more. And I find that that's often the case. So with Memrise, it's like I get everything right. It's like 100% woohoo. And then I go to my lesson and I'm like, oh, dang it. What's the word for almost again? I ask you this every single lesson. Then my teacher is like, so trying to put those words into a new context is just really critical for me actually remembering them, because outside of Memrise, because of course I can remember them and Memrise. And the other thing too about like apps like Memrise is that they give you cues, and you may not even realize it, but you'll look at them and it'll say type out the word, and you'll look at it and you'll kind of stare at the keyboard and you're like, oh, and like you pick the letters and it starts to kind of come together for you. But if you didn't have that keyboard there, you would not know what the word was. Or it's like a multiple choice question, it's only 4 answers and you're like, well, I know it's not that one and I know it's not that one, so it's either this one or this one. And it's like meh, and you get it right, and then it messes with your SRS thing because you didn't actually know it. But you know, it does help with the review process, because you do, even though you didn't really know it, you did still, like when you got the word right, that little green like positive reinforcement still is like, this is the word. So you do get a little bit of a reminder. But basically, to make a long story short, because I kind of got derailed there for a second, is putting the words in other contexts. So that's conversations with my teacher, or that's watching movies or listening to music and actually paying attention to the vocabulary being used, or even just reading. I love Link, so I often read in my languages as soon as I possibly can, which is sooner than you may think it's going to be, especially with European languages where there's a lot of shared vocabulary or similar grammar structures. you can really get started, like really your first day, with Link, especially because it's guided reading. So that's something else that I do, and that gives me those words again in a new context. I try to do as much overlap as I can. So, for example, if I'm learning with the Japanese Uncovered course, I would actually take all of the scripts from the Japanese Uncovered course, import them into Link for my own private use, of course, because I'm not going to share things that aren't mine publicly. But I'll import those in, and then I can study them in Link in addition to in the context of Japanese Uncovered. And that overlap and that repetition in different contexts, like through the Uncovered course and then through Link, and then pulling the vocabulary that I need to work on from Link, exporting it into Memrise, I kind of get this nice little triage going of, working on vocabulary and things. So that's what I do for memorization.
If you enjoy great tips like with the video you just watched, then why not try a Fluent in 3 months challenge? Shannon and I will guide you through the first 90 days of learning a language, ending in a 15-minute conversation with a native speaker.